Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Kathleen Walter. The Times Square bomb plot and a massive oil spill offer the Obama administration new challenges at a time when American mistrust of its government is at an all-time high. Joining us is Representative Tom Price, a Republican representing the 6th District in Georgia. He currently serves as the chairman of the Republican Study Committee, a caucus of conservatives in the House of Representatives. Nice to see you again, Representative Price.
Thanks, Catherine. Great to be with you. Thank you.
Representative, before we get to those stories, I want to ask you about yesterday's primaries. Some political analysts are saying that candidates backed by the Tea Party did not do so well. What do you make of that?
Well, I think the fact of the matter is that there are more Americans participating now and angry with what they see going on in Washington than ever before. So whether candidates are specifically backed by individuals in the Tea Party movement, or whether folks in the Tea Party movement are backing individuals within other parties, within other organizations, I think the good thing is that there are more and more people engaging, and that's what's going to bring Washington back to center.
All right, let's talk about the Times Square bomb plot. The suspect, Faisal Shahzad, is now facing terrorism and mass destruction charges and was read his Miranda rights upon arrest. What is your assessment of the Obama administration's response?
Well, this and so many other things, I see the administration pointing fingers more than working to solve the challenges. I think that our thanks and kudos go out to the New York City Police Department and to the FBI. What incredible work they did to be able to make certain that this individual was apprehended. But the fact of the matter is we live in a very dangerous world, and this administration and leaders in Washington right now are not doing all that we must do in order to make certain that these kinds of activities don't occur. And when they happen, that they are responded to with the greatest amount of effort and coordinated activity.
Now, Senator John McCain says that the suspect should not have been read his Miranda rights. Do you agree? Well,
again, that's a legal question. He's the individual, as I understand it, is an American citizen. He a naturalized citizen. He was apprehended on American soil. I think the question of whether or not he was read his Miranda rights is a question that needs to be answered by the legal authorities. But I think what we need is a strategy and a policy going forward, so that we're not Monday morning quarterbacking all of these issues over and over and over.
Now, right now, U.S. law enforcement officials have offered no explanation for how the suspect was allowed to board an international flight despite being hunted by the FBI and placed on the federal no-fly list. Are you alarmed that almost 10 years after September 11th, we are still allowing folks who are on the no-fly list to board flights?
Absolutely. And again, that gets to the process. What are we doing to make certain that the American people are absolutely as safe as they can be? And I haven't seen that kind of resolve and that kind of integrated effort put forward by this administration, or frankly, the leaders in Washington right now, to say this is what we will do, this is what the plan is, this is how we will make certain that the American people are protected. And that's what people across this land are crying out for. It is a consistent message, a consistent theme, a working together that results in the kind of activity at the federal level that makes it so that the process works the way it ought to.
The case is casting a light on whether to try 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and other accused terrorists in civilian court in Manhattan. Attorney General Eric Holder yesterday said New York still remains an option should the Obama administration do as Senator Chuck Schumer says, which is to just say it already, that they most likely will not be held in New York.
Well, they shouldn't say they most likely won't be held. They should say they won't be held in New York, and they should say they won't be held on American soil. There is no reason to bring Khalid Sheikh Mohammed from Guantanamo and transport him to the United States and have a trial in the United States, a criminal trial in the United States. Ought to be tried in a military tribunal. That's the process that was set up. That's the process that was agreed upon. It's the process that works. There's no reason to bring terrorists to the United States to try them in a criminal court.
All right, let's talk about another big story that has enormous consequences, especially in the Gulf of Mexico and in Florida, and that is the BP oil spill. Critics have compared the spill to Bush's Katrina. Did the Obama administration act quickly enough in its response, in your opinion?
Well, history will tell us that. My sense right now is that they did not, that the action of the administration was initially to belittle what happened in the Gulf, but also to not have the people that they needed on the ground at the right time, at the right place. That being said, clearly this is a disaster of significant proportions. It's a disaster that the company, BP, has taken full responsibility for. and for which they ought to take responsibility for and financial responsibility for. What I hope doesn't happen, though, is that we say, well, this means that we cannot produce our own oil. This means that we must become more dependent on foreign oil, not less.
Governor Schwarzenegger has withdrawn his support of drilling off California's coast, and President Obama is being pressured by Democrats to change course and retain offshore drilling restrictions. Do you think that it ultimately will derail offshore drilling?
Well, I hope not, because it can indeed be done in a responsible way and should be, and there are safeguards that can be put in place, more safeguards that ought to be put in place. But I think the bigger question is, what are we going to do in terms of energy policy? Are we going to allow for onshore exploration? Are we going to allow for clean coal technology? Are we going to expand our nuclear capability? Are we going to utilize oil shale technology that is known and used in other nations in a very environmentally sound and responsible way in order to make it so that American resources are utilized for Americans and we're not continuing to give hundreds of billions of dollars to nations overseas or that frankly don't like us?
Representative Price, the debate over the issue of faith has intensified in recent weeks, especially after a federal judge in Wisconsin ruled that the National Day of Prayer, which is scheduled for Thursday, is unconstitutional. There are some leaders, including President Obama, who say the U.S. is no longer a Christian country, despite having been founded on Christian principles. Is America's Christian heritage being eroded, in your opinion?
Well, I think it is for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is we have a leadership now, starting at the top, that doesn't recognize the exceptionalism of America or its Judeo-Christian heritage and roots. I find that to be unconscionable and offensive to virtually every single American. We are a great nation for a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons that we're great is that we have been founded upon and adhered to Judeo-Christian principles. So for a federal judge to find that the National Day of Prayer is unconstitutional, it's another one of those things where the vast majority of the American people hear that kind of thing and they just scratch their head and they say, what on earth is going on?
Representative, you called Obama's financial reform the Ivory Tower Bailout Protection Act. We know you voted against the Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. What are the most dangerous aspects of the pieces of financial reform legislation in Congress right now, and how would you characterize the Democrats' strategy on all of this?
Well, the strategy that we see coming out of the White House once again is all politics and all power and no reasonable policy. The proposal that's been put forward both in the House and the Senate by the Democrats and supported by the President is one that would ensure future bailouts. We believe that bailouts ought to end, that there ought to be no more bailouts, no more taxpayer money used for bailouts. We believe that ought to not ever happen again. The Democrats believe that ought to be enshrined and put into law. We believe that you ought to address the fundamental challenges that got us to this situation. One of them, most importantly, being the egregious activities of Fannie and Freddie, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We believe that they ought to be reined in, corralled in, decreased in their power. The administration and the Democrats, in fact, believe that they ought to be unleashed, that they ought to have unlimited power. In fact, they believe that the taxpayer ought to be on the hook for whatever Fannie and Freddie want to do. And then finally, we believe that regulatory mechanisms ought to be in place that are flexible and nimble and responsible and accountable in order to make it so that the economic system actually works. The Democrats believe that the regulatory scheme simply needs to be oppressive and keep anybody from doing anything that might at some point in the future result in some possible risk. I always remind my friends on the other side of the aisle that if there's no risk, there can be no reward. And that's the fundamental question. Are we going to allow an economic system that allows for risk and opportunity and reward, entrepreneurship and ingenuity? Or are we going to have a very bland, very pastel, very oppressive economic system that results in no American dreams being realized?
Let's talk about the new health care reform law. If the Republicans were to regain control of the House in November, would you like to see the law rescinded or at least defunded?
Oh, I think I fought valiantly and diligently to try to make certain that we moved in the direction of patient-centered health reform. I know that the status quo is unacceptable. As a physician who practiced it for over 20 years, I know that the system doesn't work for the federal government, it doesn't work for patients, and it certainly doesn't work for doctors. What we need is a system that works primarily for patients, and the bill that was signed into law doesn't work for patients. It'll result in decreasing quality, decreasing access, and increasing costs. So yes, the bill needs to be repealed and it needs to be reformed with patient-centered reform. that makes certain that folks can get health coverage, health insurance coverage, that solves the insurance challenges, especially of portability and pre-existing, and that makes certain that medical decisions are made between patients and families and doctors, not by federal bureaucrats, and that ultimately solves the lawsuit abuse challenges. You can't be serious about health reform if you're not serious about lawsuit abuse reform, and the law that was signed by the president does nothing about lawsuit abuse reform.
Representative Price, last question. I understand you're part of a new task force that'll work to decentralize power from Washington and give it back to regions, states, local governments, and individuals. What can you tell us about this task force?
Well, the 10th Amendment task force that we're creating through the Republican Study Committee says that we ought to adhere to the Constitution in every single way, including the ways that limit the powers of the federal government. So oftentimes here in Washington, what we find ourselves doing is saying, oh, we can't do that, we ought not do that because it violates the 10th Amendment. And we make wonderful speeches to that effect and try to draw attention to that. The purpose of this caucus, the purpose of this task force is to try to bring focus to what we can do to assist states to say that's not a federal responsibility, to empower states more to say to the federal government, look, thanks but no thanks. We'll go ahead and take care of that responsibility ourselves as it was defined in the Constitution. Representative Rob Bishop from Utah is heading up that task force, and I'm so very pleased with the leadership that he's bringing to the table on this.
All right, Representative Tom Price, thanks so much for joining us on Newsmax TV. It's always great to see you.
Thank you. Y'all take care.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.